Ladies and gentlemen, time now for our keynote speaker. And he is Michael Liebreich, one of the most recognized voices, I'm sure you know him very well, in the global clean energy transition sector. He is the founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. He's also the chairman and CEO of Liebreich Associates and co-managing partner of Pragmatic Capital, helping scale solutions for a net zero world. And he's advised the United Nations, also the UK government, and also sat on the board of My City Transport for London. And through his podcast, Cleaning Up, he is shaping the conversation on climate and energy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Michael Liebreich. The floor is yours. Michael.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you, everybody. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. I have to confess, I was one of the people who put up my hand. This is my first TBB. But what a way to start, right? So what are we going to do? We've had a fantastic introduction, Secretary of State. What's happening here in Portugal, Diego, the world at this extraordinary juncture, politically and economically, and then from Elena, the ambition and some of the history of InnoEnergy. So what could I possibly add to that? Well, when I put these slides together, I thought, I'm going to say, I will tell you what's going to happen next. And then when I was listening just now to those three first interventions, I thought, well, hang on a second. Remember the saying that the best way to forecast the future is actually to create it. So I'm not going to stand up here and say, I am going to forecast, I am the blind seer, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen next. To the extent that I can shine a light into what happens next, it's going to be because I am reflecting you, the innovators. You're going to tell us, through me, what is going to happen next. That's the plan, anyway. So, the big question, which we can't dance around too much, is, are we facing the end of the transition? We are not 2015 Paris, or 2021 Glasgow, where everybody stood up and said that they were going to do net zero. Remember that, net zero? They were net zero 2050, 1.5 degrees, global net zero 2050. Everybody, yeah, absolutely, not a problem, right? That's not where we are now. We are where we are. There is now President Trump back in the White House, and what he is saying is resonating around the world. We're seeing it in the UK. We're seeing it in Europe. We're seeing it in Canada. We're seeing it in Australia. Not seeing it so much in Asia. Very interesting, and we'll come back to that. So, where are we? First, we have to understand where we are to understand what's next. Now, the first half of the decade, we are at the midpoint of the decade, 5 years into this critical decade. And the first half, I call the Great Clean Energy Acceleration. And I coined this before President Trump was re-elected, and for all we knew, there's going to be another 5 years of the Great Clean Energy Acceleration, and maybe there still will be. That's what we're here to find out. Now, when I started this little thing, because I was also an innovator, I was also a creator, New Energy Finance in my garage, literally, and the green line that you see there was non-hydro renewables. So it was a bit of wind, a bit of solar, a bit of biomass, a bit of geothermal. But it was small. It was 1% of electricity. And I threw up everything that I was doing, and I said, that is the future. And let me tell you, if any of your family and friends think you're mad for what you're doing, trust me, I've been there. 10 years later, we saw that. 10 years. Do you know how long that 10 years was? Then we saw that. And some of you have been on this journey alongside me. And then the Great Clean Energy Acceleration. This is a substitution curve. That is what is happening. It's an S curve, but we don't know what the other side of the S is even going to look like. Every single forecaster who has forecasted saturation of wind and solar has been wrong. Some of them, you were at the IEA, some of them have been wrong 15 times in a row. Now, the money, I started New Energy Finance counting the money because it's very simple. What we invest in is what we'll get. No investment, we won't get it. So I started counting the money, and there you can see from 2004 to 2020, the money flowing into this trend. I now realize that this is called electrotech, after our friends at Ember, because it is production, but it's also the power grids in green there. And it grew from 250 billion. When I started New Energy Finance, the renewables were only 36 billion. And now, together, it's over 2 trillion per year. And that's the Great Clean Energy Acceleration. It was the first time when we got hit by COVID and then Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, huge crises. It was the first time. What did the world do? Did it rush back to fossil fuels? No. It accelerated investment and rollout of the clean alternatives, because for the first time, it became clear that the fossil fuels are the problem, the cause of instability, the cause of lack of resilience. They are not the solution. A huge change in mentality. Now, that is additions to the grid. We all have seen these charts thousands of times. 88% of everything added to the grid in 2024 was wind and solar. 88%. So those people who back then thought that I was mad, by 2024 they thought it was obvious. China, a lot of people, part of that pushback, say there is no point doing what we're doing. Everything that we've heard, Portugal, EU, InnoEnergy, pointless, because what China does is build coal-fired power stations, and we are irrelevant. That little green line, irrelevant. Well, I got news for you. China may be building coal-fired power stations, but it is not using them. The last 15 months, 18 months now probably, China's coal use likely has peaked. The only reason it went up the last few years was because the gas price soared because Russia invaded Ukraine. Otherwise, peak Chinese coal would have been back in early 2020s. In the US, President Trump is on his second term. Is he going to turn around the fall-off of coal in the US? Here you can see what's being added to the grid, yellow and blue, and what's being removed from the grid, black. Solar and wind being added, coal falling off the grid. And at that point, President Trump was first elected. And what happened? You remember, he said he was going to end the war on coal. That's what happened. There was more coal fell off the grid during his term than in any previous presidency. Then, of course, we had President Biden, the great clean energy acceleration, and President Trump re-elected. Is he going to be able to turn it around? Well, what was the news this week? This week, the failure of coal auctions. The Powder River Basin the coal resource in the US. They tried to hold an auction. There was one bid, 1 penny per ton. I love this quote. King Knut, much misunderstood, because everybody thinks he really tried to turn the tides back. He didn't. What he was trying to do was to explain that all the inhabitants of the world should know that the power of kings is vain and trivial. So we're the right side of history. We're the right side of economic history. And it's not just rich countries. Another criticism was, oh, well, you know, the EU, you're all rolling in it. The US, Japan, you can do your clean energy stuff. But it doesn't work in the global south. And it is actually offensive to suggest that the global south should not do coal. And I was there, by the way, and I was heavily criticized for standing up and saying maybe South Africa should not build 2 huge coal-fired power stations, Medupe and Kusile, and maybe they should use their extraordinary wind and solar resources. And I was laughed at and mocked in the halls of the World Bank. We're talking 2008, 9, 10, 11. Well, those 2 coal-fired power stations bankrupted Eskom, the greatest utility in the global south. Bankrupted Eskom, caused rolling power cuts that plague South Africa to this day. A couple of years ago, Pakistan started buying solar panels from China. And I would take one issue with something, Diego, that you said, that China is dumping its clean resources, I think you said, on Europe. But people also say, oh, they're dumping on Pakistan. Pakistan is buying. Pakistan has agency. Pakistan is buying solar. Pakistani farmers are buying solar to do irrigation. They added, in 18 months, enough solar capacity to equal 50% of their grid. Grid power demand in Pakistan is dropping despite economic growth, because they're buying cheap solar. They're buying, by the way, also, as we'll see, cheap cars. Ember is going to be all over the slides this next 2 days, I can tell. And Elena, you already started the trend. These are Ember figures for the imports of solar from China. I was on Sustainable Energy for All, SDG 7, before it was even called that. And I was convinced that we were going to solve the problem of lack of electricity in the global south because solar was going to get so cheap that they were going to start buying it and using it. And I could not be more delighted to see these charts, including, by the way, Sierra Leone, where I have a project. We put solar and batteries into a neonatal intensive care unit, and for the first time, the medical team there had reliable electricity and could save more lives. I'm the proudest of anything I've ever done in my life is that project. Now, it's not just electricity. I said it's also cars. This is electric vehicle uptake going into, of course, the great clean energy acceleration. Suddenly, this uptake during COVID, after COVID, in the period of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, people are buying electric cars. A bit more recent data there. In China, vehicles with plugs are now outselling fossil fuel vehicles. Anybody who thinks, as OPEC thinks and Saudi Aramco thinks, that there's going to be growth in oil, from what? Internal combustion car production peaked in 2016. And we're going to look at some of the other types of vehicles in a second. I love these next 2 slides. They're my favorites at the moment. The Nissan Leaf. I had the driving force behind it. Andy Palmer at Nissan was the guy who said we should create an affordable electric car around the time Elon Musk was making his little sports car. and they produced the Nissan Leaf. And on the left, you can see the Nissan Leaf 2011, and on the right, the Nissan Leaf 2026. And in 2021, you could say, well, I'm not going to take this seriously. It has a 75-mile range. What's that good for? Shopping trip, take the kids to school, and then that's it. You have to charge it again. But look, 4 times the range, 3 times the speed of charging, 2 times the power off the lights, and 2/3 of the cost. Cheaper and better. And here's the question. A lot of people still say, oh, but 300 miles range is not enough. I say that. I have a confession to make. I drive to the Alps. I still love to ski. I used to do a lot of it. I drive to the Alps, and I drive in an ICE, internal combustion car, because I don't want to stop. And I get attacked horribly on social media for admitting that 300 miles range does not get you to the Alps, and it's a pain to have to keep stopping and planning your trip. That's the reality, pragmatic reality. But what do you think is going to happen in the next 15 years? What do you think a Nissan Leaf 2040 is going to look like? It'll be cheaper and it'll be better. Now, these trends, this arc of history that we're all part of, is not without its problems. And what I love is in this group, I don't have to talk about them as problems. I can talk about them as opportunities. Because this is the innovation crowd. You're going to tell me over the next couple of days how you've solved this problem, or how you're going to solve this problem. So, I don't need to tell anybody here what happened on the 28th of April. 2 countries completely dark. By the way, we had a power cut in the UK as well around the same time. Heathrow Airport, completely dark. Let me tell you, down here, they got 2 countries' grids back up and running in 12 hours, which is half the time that it took to get Heathrow Airport up and running. So I don't know what you put in your breakfast cereal, but the recovery was magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Was it due to renewables? Were renewables the problem? Well, renewables have been blamed for every power cut since I've been doing this, which is 20 years. And here's Tucker Carlson, where's Maria? The great journalist. And Texas, the power cut, which was back in 2021, because Texas's problem, totally reliant on windmills. But of course, it turned out not to be so. Australia, it was the wind turbines, 2016. Of course it wasn't. It was a transmission line, you can see on the right. But here's the thing. Renewables are not without their share of responsibility. Not guilt, responsibility. Why? Because the speed with which the system is changing reduces resilience unless we invest, unless we innovate. You can't use the protocols that ran the grid when it was all spinning heavy chunks of metal. You get rid of that, you have to change the way you run the grid. I'm very pleased. I work a lot with National Grid in the UK, and they have been working on this for, I would say, nearly a decade, very intensively. Could these things happen in the UK? Who knows? I hope not. But we've got to invest and we've got to innovate. And we've got to do it ahead of these sorts of situations, because they cost lives and they cost credibility. Now, we've also got problems like this. Curtailment. This is the UK. Deepest cuts in CO2 emissions of any G20 country. But also the most expensive electricity, and 250 hours a year we are paying wind turbines to switch off in the north whilst paying sometimes the same people to generate using gas in the south. Now, that offends me as an engineer, it offends me as an investor, a financier, but it is also politically dangerous, very politically dangerous, because it is so easy to point to that and say, this system you're all building is expensive and it's rubbish, and it's making cronies rich, and we need to address that. It's going to get a lot worse. This is why I'm so disappointed that we didn't adopt zonal pricing in the UK. Because price signals matter. Why did renewables get cheap? The experience curve plus price signals, moving away from feed-in tariffs decided by bureaucrats to prices set by competition. Price signals matter. This is Chile, where they have 3,000 hours. So that's a postcard from the future if we don't deal with this problem. Now, I said it's not just electricity, it's also not just cars, obviously batteries. There you can see passenger EVs, commercial EVs. I started New Energy Finance working on storage in about 2007-8, forecasting what would happen. This is a forecast from 2019 and the outturn of battery growth. Again, it's one of those ones where every single forecaster is wrong. The growth in batteries, whether they're in cars, in buses, in trucks, or attached to the grid, is going faster than any forecast. In terms of challenges, and Elena, you started us on this route, it is also a huge challenge just how dominant China is in this whole world. Every single clean energy product, China is dominant. And that is a problem because of the political ramifications. We have to accept where we are in the political cycle. That pushback, you can agree with everything I've said and still say we can't go there because China is so dominant. We have this extraordinary situation where the US is going around the world telling the global south, telling the whole world, telling Europe as well, buy our LNG, and China is going around the world and saying, buy our clean tech, buy our electrotech. And who wins that tug of war is one of the defining questions of this decade. You already showed this, the exports, China. I was at an aviation conference, speaking at an aviation conference on their technology options, and I showed this. I said, this is what's happening. And I said, China has gone from the number 5 exporter of cars to the number 1 in 3 years. But of course, they have not started to export their aeroplanes, their wide-body jets, yet. And everybody in the audience went, woo. Another challenge, AI. AI is going to be fabulous for anybody managing anything to do with energy. Huge benefits, transformational benefits. But it creates an enormous challenge for the network. Enormous demand for AI data centers. Now, we've been there before with claims that something is going to use all the electricity ever produced anywhere in the world. So this is the digital internet economy. And if you go back to 1999, these, by the way, are two people who think that clean energy, well, one of them is no longer with us. The other is saying that clean energy doesn't work. But they said in 1999 that the internet would use half of the electricity. It turned out to be 2%. Communications technology, there we go, 50% from comms. This one is now from 2015. This is Bitcoin, 2020. I mean, literally, Newsweek publishes this, saying that Bitcoin will use all the world's energy by 2020. What are we all, I mean, it's extraordinary. But anyway, So we've been there before. It is true there will be a lot of demand growth from data centers. Without question, enormous demand growth. There you've got percentage growth. You can see data centers. Here's the interesting thing, though. This is growth rates, and electrification of transport will be faster. Partly because it takes so long to build these big data centers and so on. But the electric transport, that growth is built in because the cars we see on the road are 4% electric globally, and the cars we're buying are 20% electric. So you'll get growth in sales, but you'll also get the fleet renewing. We can already see that growth. The utilities are already planning for it. And when you put it in absolute terms, not growth rates, but terawatt hours, then this is what you see. Data centers don't make the top 4. They get all the attention for 2 reasons. One, they are very difficult to serve. Gigawatts in one place. This isn't a heat pump here and there, a car here and there. This is gigawatts in one place, which is hard. It's like building an aluminium smelter in, name your favorite holiday location. That's hard. The other reason they get all the attention is that their owners are fabulously rich and own all the social media platforms. So I don't want to downplay the difficulty of serving data centers, but it's not the first time that we've seen demand growth, and we'll figure it out. Now these guys, these enormously rich bros, call them what they are, they have decided the solution will be nuclear, largely because they love technology. They feel incredibly angry and frustrated that electricity is standing in their way, so they've decided the answer is going to be nuclear. And I'm a nuclear engineer by ancient history. Good luck. Good luck. They will build some nuclear, and they will discover what all other utilities have discovered. It is slow, it is difficult, it is expensive. So that gets us to the point where I was at Climate Week in New York a couple of weeks ago. I was working on huge flows of money that are going into the global south now, into extraordinary growth rates, etc. And President Trump was saying climate change is the greatest con job perpetrated on the world. So does that mean that we're going to stop those trends that I've just been talking about? Are we going to see the end of the transition because of a speech at the UN by the president? It's not just him. There's a lot of people echoing, and oil and gas industry, some people very excited that they no longer have to worry about net zero. And they anchor a lot of their narratives of the failure of the transition to this statistic. 85% of energy was fossil, and now it's 80%. And they'll say things like, well, you can add a bit of clean energy. We're in the additive business. We'll just add a bit. And of course, this is not historical in the sense that UK, 42% coal has gone to 0% coal. We don't use coal in ships. There's all sorts of examples. Of course it's not additive. They don't use charcoal and peat and dung in the global south because we stopped using it in Europe. It's absurd. And then we get this sort of narrative, Tony Blair. Let's be pragmatic. I love this report. Here's Tony Blair saying, let's be pragmatic. And on the picture on the cover is Climeworks. And a week later, there was a news story in Iceland that engine, that machine there, had not even captured as much carbon as was embodied in the machine. That's how pragmatic it is. The other thing that Tony Blair said was pragmatic was, of course, small modular reactors, the ones that the bros want to build. But as a climate solution, well, if you've got the size of your small modular reactor and you want to catch up with the green line, you know that green line that was growing of mainly wind and solar power? Rolls-Royce, you would need to build 1,250 Rolls-Royce SMRs. GE Hitachi, 7,000. Oklo 8,000. Sorry, Hitachi 2,000, Oklo 8,000. That's just to catch up with where wind and solar are today. But of course, you need to go further because we're electrifying. Electricity demand is growing. If you want to reach the output of wind and solar by 2050, all those people who say that small modular reactors are going to be the solution, they would have to build 28,000 of them. And that's still only catching up with wind and solar. It still doesn't decarbonize the global economy. So I am a fan of nuclear and of small modular reactors, their role they could play. Serve the data centers, do what you can with them, but don't think that they're going to be a climate solution. Wrong scale. Now, back to the transition and the narratives of failure. If you are wedded to the idea of 1.5 degrees, you will be disappointed with what I'm about to say. Because as emissions have continued to grow for the last few decades, what you have to do to get to 1.5 degrees has become more and more extreme. Improbably extreme. As soon as the Paris Agreement mentioned 1.5 degrees and kicked off the research at the IPCC into what that meant, it would have meant destroying half of our energy infrastructure. It was never going to happen. And as soon as the IPCC's report came out in 2018, I said so. And the marginal carbon price to do that, for 2 degrees, you need a marginal carbon price of a couple of $100. For that, you need $6,050. Why politicians all jumped on the bandwagon, I personally don't understand, and serious business people and banks. It was never going to happen, sorry. It was a very good exercise, by the way, and I was happy to play along with it, to explore what it would have taken. Because net zero means you look at every industry and every investment as opposed to 80% reduction where everybody says, I love it. Knock yourselves out, I'm in the 20%. So we did the exercise, but it was never going to happen. And we now need to reset. So the big pieces that I wrote for Bloomberg and on my podcast, the Pragmatic Climate Reset. How do we wind back from insistence on 1.5 degrees and demonizing people who refuse, who refuse to adopt 1.5 degrees and net zero 2050 globally, not just in our economies, but globally. We need to move on. How do we do it? That's part of the debate. So that has failed, but I want to go back to those statistics, 80 and 85% primary energy, which is fossil. So first of all, it spans a period, and Dan Yergin talked about it in his Troubled Transition piece, a period in which China's coal use surged, and then clean energy accelerated, as we've seen. And you add the two together, and you say, well, it didn't change much, therefore the future will be flat. Excuse me? One trend is over, and the other trend is accelerating. The other problem is primary energy. We all know this. It's a Sankey diagram. That's primary energy, the stuff you put in. 65% of it is wasted. What society needs is the energy services. Cold beers, MRI scanners in the global south, warm homes, moving around, mobility. So we need to focus on energy services. That demand-side focus is critical. How do we do what society needs? Society doesn't need lumps of coal or million BTUs of gas. It needs a cold beer, or it needs to go and visit its grandparents. That's what we need to focus on. Now, electrification, and I've gone full circle back to why we're all here. We're talking about electrification. Primary energy, when you use coal and you have a filament light bulb and you switch to LED using solar power, 95% reduction in primary energy. Why anybody cares what primary energy is, was, will be, or is changing is utterly beyond me. It's a metric that literally tells you nothing unless you want to use it to say that clean energy, electrification is pointless. That's the sole thing that it's used for. That's an electric car, same kilometers, same services, 75% reduction. Heating, go from a boiler or a furnace to a heat pump, 75% reduction. Primary energy is, it just doesn't tell you anything. So I built a model of the entire global energy system, and it took me half an hour, because it has 4 lines. All I said was, I want the global economy to grow. Sorry if anybody in the audience is a degrowther, you won't like this next bit. I want people to have more cold beers, to visit their grandparents, to take their kids to school, to do all the things, to have warm homes. I mean, let's be realistic. That's what energy services are. And I want that to grow, because that is human progress. I want it to grow as it has grown the last few decades. Let's call it a bit more than 3% per year. I want the demand side to be efficient. I want to do all those things a little bit more efficiently every year. So let's say energy demand, I want to grow 2% per year, forever. Human progress. But what I want, first of all, I'm going to adjust for the primary energy fallacy, and we're already 1/3 clean. And then I want the clean stuff, the energy stuff, to grow faster than 2% per year. That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying demonize Shell. I'm not saying that we have to destroy our energy infrastructure before we have an alternative. I'm not saying we have to be in a cold apartment or not go on holiday. I'm just saying grow the clean stuff faster than demand. And look what happens. Nothing. Nothing much visible for their first decade. And then the blue, because of the miracles of compound growth, forces fossil fuels off the system. That's what the transition looks like if you just grow clean faster than demand, which we are doing. That is what is happening. Now, this is using 5% growth of clean energy every year. That's not what's going to happen. We can go much faster, and then it'll mature and we'll go slower, right? But it's a 4-line model that took me half an hour to prove that anybody who says there's no transition doesn't know what they're talking about. There is a transition, and it looks like this. So while that one has failed, transition like a hare has failed, transition like a tortoise, which is what we're doing, is working. And I'm not saying slow down. I'm saying that in order to move the system of systems, which includes the political system and society, to move it as fast as possible, we have to be pragmatic and stop talking about stuff that frankly isn't going to work. So that's what we're going to get for the second part of this decade and out into the future, the pragmatic climate reset. Now, I just want to finish with some thoughts on what is next. And for those of you, there are some, no doubt, who've heard me talk before about hydrogen. So it wouldn't be fair, I wouldn't feel honest not talking about hydrogen, although Elena said, please, please don't be. So I do this with love. I do this with love for all entrepreneurs, everybody who steps up and tries to innovate and build something. I also do it with love for all investors except the ones that have ever said no to an idea of mine, of whom there are actually a few in the audience. But I love you too. So let's be real. We are in the closing years of a boom-bust cycle. I don't call it a bubble. I talk about the souffle, because bubbles go pop and they disappear, and souffles slowly sort of collapse. And that's where we are. And I'm very proud that I was one of the people who never bought into the bubble. I may have fed it a little bit in earlier years, but I never thought we were going to get, by 2050, these absurd figures of 800 million tons. And the biggest one, the biggest forecast ever made for hydrogen was the team that I created and trained, but I wasn't involved in it, which was BNEF. We are in the closing years of that. And I've seen this cycle. I'm old enough, I've got the gray hairs to prove it. I've seen this cycle. I've seen 2 out of 4 hydrogen cycles. 1999, fuel cell vehicles will overtake gasoline-powered cars in the next 20 to 30 years. Well, back in 2017, before this cycle, I could feel the cycle was about to start again. I produced this slide showing, on the left, electric cars, and on the right, fuel cell cars to scale. And what I said was, if we come back in 10 years and we look at this chart, the scale will have changed, the chart will look the same. Should we do it? There in red, you can see the first few years from the last chart, and that's what happened next. So be careful, because it doesn't matter what politicians say about energy technologies, particularly if they don't have thermodynamics. Now, I'm sort of slightly famous for the hydrogen ladder, and of course, there is at the top the stuff we do already with hydrogen, which we have to clean up, and one row down, hard to abate: shipping, aviation, chemicals, steel, and long-duration storage. And those things we will have to do, and it's hard to see how you do them without hydrogen, row B. But here's the problem, the real problem we don't talk about enough. Those 2 rows together, if you did those, would use 4 times all the wind and solar produced today. That green line, in fact, the green line would do just the top row, 2.5% of global emissions. If you do it through green hydrogen, you've used up all the wind and solar ever installed. That's the reality, that's the scale, and that's a problem. Because every project developer, wind and solar project developer, can do one of 2 things: sell electricity or make hydrogen. Sell electricity or make hydrogen. People who say it's not either or, it's either or. It's either or. And if you do that, then you don't electrify other things. So there is a companion chart. Oops. This is heavy-duty trucks. So I'll spin through this. Heavy-duty trucks look the same. This is something that I'm doing, Pragmacharge. Trucks will go the same way as cars. But this chart is the companion chart of the ladder. This is how much emissions reduction you get from a terawatt-hour of clean energy. Blue, direct electrification. Purple, using it via hydrogen. Even steel, the savings are small because you can go to natural gas, DRI, and get 3/4 of the emissions reductions. Hydrogen only does the last little bit. And here's the problem. Every single thing you do with hydrogen is 2 or 9 times less effective at reducing emissions than electrification. 2 to 9 times. What that means is you're a project developer, you're deciding to use your electricity, sell it or make hydrogen. The moment you make hydrogen, you are stepping away from an opportunity to have 2 to 9 times the impact. Until curtailment reaches 50%, all of the purple things are bad for the climate. That's analysis, and it pains me, and I say it with love, because should we do some industrial strategy and prepare for the time when we have infinite green electricity? Yes. Are there niches that work? Yes. But fundamentally, as a climate solution, it's not hydrogen. So what is it? Well, what are we all here for? Electrification. Electrification. China, Elena's already shown this chart, has blasted through the rates of electrification of the EU or of Europe and of the US. China gets it. It gets it because it imports its fossil fuels, but it gets it. And look at that. We don't. That's what has to change. That's what's next. And again, Ember has done a fantastic job of explaining the electrotech revolution. You can download these charts. I suggest you do. But you can see generation, transportation, use of electricity. That is what's next. Industrial heat, any temperature. There are people out there innovating on industrial heat. People say you can't do high temperatures electrically. Hello, arc welding, of course you can. You can go to any temperature. Thermal storage, you can buffer, because industrial processes don't like being switched on and off at high temperatures. This is a news story, literally from yesterday. The world's largest high-temperature battery. Sadly, an American company, good friends of mine as well. And I know there are people in the audience doing this and hoping to beat Rondo at their game. And I wish all runners in that race the best of luck. And let me finish with one final thought, which is so important when we talk to politicians and the general public. People say, yes, but you've done all of that and the electricity prices are so high. We talked about zonal pricing to push down wholesale prices, but electrification, cars, heat pumps, industry, data centers is volume. What happens in an industry when you increase volume? The learning curve, but also the fixed costs get spread over a larger number. The grid gets spread over a larger number. So volume growth is lower grid costs. This is not understood. This is not in the debate, and it needs to be. And because of the nature of what we're going to add, it's also more flexibility. This is the virtuous circle that we need to see. More volume, spread the cost over a larger under a larger umbrella, and add flexibility. And that is what's coming next. Thank you.
What a fantastic speech. Thank you so much, Michael. I have a few questions for Michael. I'm thinking when I go back to London, my boss, my colleagues will ask me, where were you? So I was at a conference on electrification, to be specific, clean industrial electrification, powering our planet economy and security. My question to you is, what do I tell them? Why would the average person care about electrification, industrial electrification, to be specific?
Well, you'd have to say, where shall I start? That's the first thing.
But in a nutshell,
Right.
You know that elevator speech, why would you care? So what?
So it depends who you're talking to, right? Because you can say, because it's the future, right? It is the direction of travel. Industrial electrification, first of all, it's people's workplaces. It's happening in their workplaces. It's also how they're going to assure that we have jobs in the future. Because I can tell you, let's say if you work at a ceramics plant, you're going to be using electricity and not gas, within a few years. You're also, if you're making the equipment for that ceramics factory, it's going to be electric. If you're thinking of where to go to college, then you're going to go and study. You're not going to become a gas engineer. You're going to become an electrical engineer or an electrochemist. So it's jobs of the future. But that point that I finished with about if people are not interested in that, you say, because it's going to drive electricity costs down.
That's so important.
It's going to
look at the
spread
UK,
the costs.
how expensive it is.
But the answer is we're investing enormously in the national grid, right? In all of that transmission. We've got to put electricity through those wires to drive the costs down. The virtuous circle is electrification of transport, heating, and industrial heat. And that will drive the costs down, not up. And that's probably the main point that I would try to make.
And when you're speaking, I'm thinking about the risks involved, and of course, as you mentioned, what happened here back in April, this room would have been completely pitch black. What about the risks of, blackouts and also possibly even cybersecurity?
Yeah, we have to take that incredibly seriously, because what you're doing as you shift to that, electro-tech revolution world, you're removing piles of coal, you're removing the big gas holders, you're removing line pack in the gas pipelines, the gas that's in the system, you're removing or making irrelevant the strategic petroleum reserves. So you're moving to a system with very low buffers. So you're putting all your eggs in one basket, you better watch the basket. And that means investment. Yeah. But that is, how can I put it? Do we have innovators here who are good at that stuff? Yes.
And just on that point about what happened here in April, why did it happen? And do you think that any of these innovators here, any other people here could have had a solution, something to stop these blackouts?
Well, so
is it there, that technology?
At the moment, there's there are reports on reports being produced on why it happened.
We're waiting for the EU one, I know, next month.
The answer is, if the grid is the most complicated system, engineering system that we've got. And the European grid, by the way, is extraordinary. It's an incredible asset for Europe, with the same voltage and frequency from Lithuania to Cadiz, and from northwest France all the way down to Ukraine. It's an incredible asset, but it's very complicated. And in a failure like this, there are many reasons, because what you want to ask is not what went wrong, but what were the different places we could have intervened to stop it from happening, and there are many. The bottom line, in my view, you had a bunch of generators that promised to be there, promised to be reliable ahead of time, and then weren't. So the grid folk are pointing the finger at them, and they're pointing the finger back. Fundamentally, it is the grid operator, because if people are not conforming to the grid codes, it's the grid operator, the system operator, not the grid operator, the system operator has to police that. The system operator, and ultimately they report to the politicians. So I'm afraid that the blame goes all the way up. Mm-hmm. Technical answer why it happened was around voltage, not around frequency. It was actually voltage. There were some weird harmonics that had happened very often, and people had sort of said, yeah, that's really strange, we should do something about that, but they never did.
So interesting, because I just think, how did it happen?
Maria, sorry, you asked for solutions.
Yeah.
I don't know all the different solutions, but let me say this. It should not take, it was April 28th, May, June, July, August, September, October. 6 months later, we're still having a what happened conversation. If we have...
Can it happen again, by the way?
Sorry?
Could it happen again?
They're being very careful and running lots of gas. But imagine a world in which every single thing connected to the grid was sending out voltage and frequency signal, was emitting that data. Mm-hmm. And that data could be aggregated and analyzed by AI in the blink of a very large data center. Mm-hmm. Right? We would know immediately. ChatGPT, what the hell just happened? Well, you'd wait for the power to come back on, then you'd do ChatGPT, what the hell just happened? And we should have that answer within, literally it should be minutes or hours. And when we look back in 15 years at the way we were managing this unbelievably complex, animal, the European grid, we will smile and remember the kind of the olden days when we were flying, Concorde with no controls.
Yeah, no, it's scary, especially Heathrow, as you said. That took even longer to get back up and running. Europe's biggest airport.
Yes, and astonishingly. Heathrow had access to 3 different substations. One substation went down. They had no tested process to switch to another substation.
Wow.
Now, you can ask why that was. I don't know if I should tell the story, but when I asked...
We have 3... Yep,
yeah,
we have
I'm not going to tell. I'm not going to get anybody... But it was human error. It was human error. Very simple.
On that point, national security concerns with regards to industrial electrification, are there any? How big are they?
Absolutely. So we should be worried about power cuts. We should be worried about managing so we get ahead of the next weird harmonics. But also, the system is under attack all the time. right? There are bad actors, whether they're corporates or state actors, and we know that they're attacking the system all the time, and we have to be one step ahead of them. You know, Amazon Web Services went down a couple of days ago,
yeah.
And part of the problem is everybody had chosen the cheapest solution, which is, of course, going to be a big web service provider. Nobody said, let me think about that. Let me just pay a bit more, but be diversified, right? And they would have had, 2 days ago, a very good day because their social media platform would have kept running while all the other ones had gone down. So we have to worry about cyber and resilience overall, but also, and this is not a trivial problem. For instance, I'm all in favor of those cheap Chinese cars flooding the market, put a big smile on people's face, you know, trying to protect our industry through tariffs rather than through competition is the wrong way to go. But those cars drive around, they're on every street, they're filming every single thing, they're filming every single pedestrian, they're filming every single minister, right? And whose house they're coming out of, and so on. And who knows what they're doing with that data. And there are examples of where data from solar inverters and from cars is being sent around the world to who knows where, but we can guess. So it is a very, very serious problem, but it is a problem that gets addressed through geopolitical relationships, all the way, you know, up and down the stack. Understand it, deal with it, make it a condition of the various deals, trade deals. I was on the board of trade in the UK. We have a lot of levers to address those sorts of problems.
But what about all the trade tensions that we're seeing, Trump's tariffs that you mentioned? How, you know, just looking at that fantastic graph that you showed there with the EU's electrification in China, could that impact anything?
100%. The trade, the quicker this transformation, this revolution, or this transition, I have always said, by 2100 we won't be burning things, because burning things is fundamentally stupid. It's stupid economically, it's stupid thermodynamically, it's stupid for the environment. So we'll be done. If it's going to be done before 2100, it's going to be because smart policies, smart innovators, commitment of funds, and also trade. We need free-flowing talent, money, technology, commodities, and so on, because that's how things grow fast. That's why the period of globalization was this period that pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So if we start putting friction into that system, then we will slow it down. There's no question. So at the moment, we're not in a period of slowing down. It's just one of the forces of pushback is the tariffs, absolutely.
Michael, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. It's such a pleasure, so enthralling and captivating to listen to you. A round of applause. Michael Liebreich, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.